Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, we'll talk about Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Naz Reid. I'll predict which one of those guys will be back, which one won't. We'll also talk about how they both got better this year. They both continue to improve their value. It's all coming next. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Happy Monday, everybody. Hope you had a fantastic weekend. Perhaps watching the finals Sunday night. Not as compelling of a game, obviously, as game one was, but we got a tie series going to Indianapolis for game two. But today on the show, I want to dig in on a couple of pending Timberwolves free agents and or I guess guys who could be free agents, depending on what Naz does with his option. I want to talk a bit about their seasons, first of all, like how both Naz and Nickeil Alexander-Walker performed this year for the Wolves, why they both got better. I'll also tell you which of the two I think will be back moving forward and which of the two I believe will move on. So we'll dig into, I think we'll do Nickeil first, then we'll get into Naz Reid, but we'll cover both those guys and also a couple of Timberwolves notes along the way as we cover those two players today. A big thank you, first of all, for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. Okay. So if you have missed the last few shows, if you're a new listener, basically what I'm doing right now is I'm going through the roster, doing season reviews of each player, discussing based on the context of what we expected for the year. How did they perform for the season? Now that it's all said and done for the 2024-25 season, how did each of these guys perform individually? Did they contribute to expectations, beyond, below, and also the context of their role on the roster? And what's the outlook for next year based on their contract situation, as well as the Wolves' current roster and what the role could be next season? So I started with the end of the roster, the guys that played the least, and now we're working our way up to the starters, and we're going to close out really the reserves today with Nickeil and Naz. And so we're going to talk Nickeil Alexander-Walker first. And of course, both of these guys are, I mean, Nickeil is an unrestricted free agent. So that's that. I mean, we know that. Naz Reid does have a player option for next season, and it would be a shock if he did not, I guess, opt out. Or I think that technically, yeah, it'd be opting out, based on just how much more money he could make. Now, to be clear, like the wrinkle here is Brooklyn is like the only team that has actual cap space. Naz, if he were to opt in, would get $15 million next year. If all things are equal and, blind team A, whatever, or blind pulling whatever team behind the curtain, if there's no salary cap, Naz is worth well north of $20 million a year. Like he would get probably 25 to 28 million, but nobody has that kind of money. So Naz could opt in for the 15 million because he, the alternative is he opts out. And if he doesn't get the money from Brooklyn, what kind of money is he going to get? Like, could he get a little more than 15? Yeah, but teams aren't going to have cap space. The other thing is he could be guaranteed a starting job elsewhere. In Minnesota, he's not guaranteed a starting job if Julius Randle's back. He's very likely a sixth man again. So what's the alternative for Naz? Well, he could opt in and sign an extension with Minnesota, or opt out and then sign a new contract. But in this situation, he could opt in and then sign an extension that goes beyond this year, which would be more helpful for Minnesota. And again, Minnesota doesn't have cap space either. So if he opted out, it'd be hard for Minnesota to then sign him to an extension. It makes more sense for him to opt in. Then the extension begins the following year instead of like buying out the current year. So that's a real thing that they could choose to do with Naz. And we'll talk more about Naz here in a minute. But with Nickeil's actually an unrestricted free agent. And Minnesota if they try and keep Naz Reid and try and keep Julius Randle, they're not going to have cap space to keep Nickeil Alexander-Walker. I know they're saying they're optimistic they could do it. One way would be if Julius Randle opts out and the Wolves, or I guess he could opt in or out, and Minnesota could essentially tear up the option year, which is almost $31 million for this year for Julius, sign him for less. All that to say, the cap gymnastics to keep Nickeil Alexander-Walker, if you're also keeping Randle and Reid, are extremely difficult, extremely complicating. Could they do it? Yeah. But given the importance of Julius Randle and Naz Reid to this team and the potential replacement for Nickeil Alexander-Walker already on the roster, we'll talk more about that here in a minute. Nickeil seems to be the one. He's also the one due for the biggest raise. Nickeil Alexander-Walker this last year made what did he make? Like $4 million? Yeah, it was like right around a little over $4 million this year. It's crazy how good of a deal for the Wolves. The deal was that Nickeil signed a couple off seasons ago. Remember, he was a free agent the year after the trade. And for Nickeil Alexander-Walker, actually, we can start there. Remember the trade at the trade deadline just over 2 years ago, almost 2.5 years ago, when Minnesota acquired Mike Conley and Nickeil Alexander-Walker in the D'Angelo Russell deal, and they got a couple of second-round picks out of it. And depending on how you look at it, the second-round picks are the throw-in, or Nickeil Alexander-Walker was the throw-in. Nobody at the time thought Nickeil Alexander-Walker would be a legit rotation piece. I remember there being some discussion about how he could be a sneaky good throw-in, really, because remember, he also was a free agent after that season. So he comes to Minnesota, and at the time, I remember doing the show after the trade and talking about, look, Nickeil's shooting 40% from three in limited volume for Utah in the current season. Prior to that, 3 seasons in the league, he never shot better than 34.5% from three. And he was coming off of a season split between New Orleans and Utah where he shot 31% on three-pointers. And so I was like, he is more, and the skill set is there for him to be a 3-and-D type guy. He had, was a good defender. But the idea that he would be an integral part of Minnesota's rotation was, it was pretty far-fetched. Minnesota re-signs him that offseason. I actually was a little surprised they did, and it was 2 years and like $9 million, basically, split up over 2 seasons. And immediately after that first season, everyone knew it was a steal. And arguably, he had an even better year this year. He shot it a little, 1 percentage point worse from three. Volume-wise, he got more attempts up overall, and he averaged 9.5 points a game, which was his highest since he was a higher volume second-year guy in New Orleans when they were trying to turn him into like a primary scoring option, which is obviously never going to be what Nickeil is. And Nickeil Alexander-Walker in a Timberwolves uniform really grew over the last 2 years and increased his value as a player in a number of different ways. One would be he's now a functional backup point guard. And I've never liked him as a backup point guard. I don't think that's his forte, but Minnesota has basically given him, this year he was the backup point guard. Like that was his role. And because of how he performed last season, they believe that could be the case. And so they let Jordan McLaughlin and Monte Morris leave in free agency and said, Nickeil, the job's yours. And we saw the assist rate tick up slightly. We saw the turnover rates tick up slightly. We also saw his usage rate go up a little bit. We saw him get a little bit more aggressive off the dribble and get to the line a little bit more frequently. And I think for the most part, it was a good thing. The other thing Nickeil's really done in Minnesota, and to me, this is the most valuable thing, is he's become an absolute knockdown corner three-point shooter. Over 2 seasons in Minnesota, he's like 46% from the corners on threes, which is great. For his career, he'd never been above 38.5% from the corners. 45% 2 years ago, and nearly half of his threes came from the corners. And this year, he was 47%. Only about a third of his threes came from the corners this year. But he is absolutely one of the better corner three-point shooters in the entire league, and that is, of course, a valuable skill set. And he's a plus defender. I thought the defense took a half step back this year. He's far from the only guy in Minnesota that we could say that about in terms of their individual defense for the year. But he still has value as a 3-and-D guy and in a pinch, a point guard, a secondary type creator off the bench. Nickeil Alexander-Walker has incrementally improved in terms of what he provides. There's a couple other things I want to hit specific to that, and then I'll talk about what I think he can get in the open market and a little bit of chatter surrounding what he might do. So we'll do that. We'll put a bow on Nickeil, and then we'll talk a bit of Naz Reid. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors at Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it is easy to lose track. And that's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app either. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery, which, is a whole other thing, but way more than I thought I was. And now with Monarch Money, it's much easier to budget smarter and save more. And really, maybe the best thing is the all-in-one convenience. Instead of juggling multiple apps, I could just use Monarch to check finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. All right. So we talked about Nickeil's improvement in terms of corner three-point shooting, his improvement as a functional backup point guard, and how he's just increased his value overall over the last couple of seasons. I think in free agency, he's worth somewhere between 3 and 4 times what his contract was last year, which again was a little bit over $4 million. There was a rumor that the Orlando Magic tried to trade for him at the deadline, and it would have been silly for the Wolves to trade him. I know there was some chatter, but I think the chatter was mostly around other teams having interest in Nickeil and not the Wolves trying to trade Nickeil based on everything I just talked about. His value of over, paid a little over $4 million. But what he does is a corner three-point shooter, an overall three-point shooter, a defender, a backup point guard. Those things are all like worth way more than what he was getting paid by the Wolves last year. The report about Nickeil and the interest that several teams had interest in him at the deadline, but Michael Scotto over at Hoops Hype said that Orlando was interested in Nickeil Alexander-Walker at the trade deadline. And, not surprising. And he fits also what Orlando, was trying to do. I think he fits their defensive culture. And of course, Orlando needs shooting, right? Like we know Orlando is a good defensive team. They're young, they're athletic. They need more shooting, but they also aren't going to add shooting at the expense of that defense, which is tough, tenacious. And Nickeil does both of those things. He's one of the absolute best. 3-and-D is kind of like a term we're not using as much anymore. There aren't as many guys that like classify as those specific role players, but Nickeil is that. He does a little more than the 3-and-D guys, 10 years ago, because he can distribute a little bit. He can score a little off the dribble at a pinch. It makes sense to me why Orlando would be interested. There's also a report. Was this Scotto as well? About what Nickeil Alexander-Walker could fetch in free agency. I said I thought he'd be 3 to 4 times as much what he got paid last year. And there was a report that the full non-taxpayer mid-level exception is basically what teams would be willing to give him, that there'd be several teams willing to do that, which is going to end up being in the neighborhood of $13 to $14 million. So basically in line with what I was saying, actually kind of right in line with what I was saying about what his value would be. I mean, that's the going rate for a guy who's going to be somewhere between your 6th and 9th guy probably not a 9th guy, 6th and 8th guy off the bench, which is what he was in Minnesota. I mean, a contract like that would immediately put him 5th on the Timberwolves, ahead of or right in the neighborhood of what Naz Reid's option would be, but behind only Ant, Rudy, Randle, and McDaniels. Some team is going to say, hey, he's essentially our Jaden McDaniels. I know they're not the same guy, but like that idea. Where he's our 4th option on offense potentially, and he's our lockdown defender, or he's our 6th man. He can provide a little bit of scoring punch, because remember, he was a first-round pick, like 17th overall, 18th overall by the Pelicans. There was some idea that he could be a higher usage combo guard that could score. And I think too much was put on his plate early in his career. I don't think he is that guy. I don't think he is your scoring 6th man. But I do think there's more than just a corner 3-point shooter. And he expanded that a little bit this year, again, to almost to the tune of 10 points per game. And he reduced the number of threes he was shooting, or at least corner threes. He was a little more aggressive above the break and a little bit more aggressive putting the ball on the floor. We saw it in the playoffs, certainly that game against OKC, but throughout the playoffs where he was being a little more aggressive off the dribble. And that's something that some of these teams might be able to like, all right, he's entering his prime. We can unlock this. The baseline, the floor here is an outstanding 3-and-D guy, but there is a little bit of upside still. So I would be really surprised if Minnesota was able to bring Nickeil Alexander-Walker back. I just think someone's going to be like, all right, here's 15 mil. Like, I think that's probably going to happen. The other reason why Minnesota is probably a little more concerned with the Julius and Naz piece of the 3 pending free agents is the Nickeil role is a bit easier to fill versus, a stretch big like Naz or somebody with the all-around offensive capability and physicality defensively, Julius Randle, who can help take the pressure off of Ant. Like that, those are 2 harder positions to fill. And as great as Nickeil is, the Timberwolves could think that they already have the replacement on the roster, probably in the form of Terrence Shannon Jr. Now, they're different players. Terrence Shannon Jr., TJ Shannon is, I think, has more offensive upside and he's more physical defensively. He's probably not as good of a defender, but he's a bigger body. He's got more range on his 3-point shot, although he may not be as accurate. I think that the half-court scoring maybe isn't better now, but it could be. It's certainly raw. But the open floor, he's certainly more dynamic too. But similar type of player, energy guy, 3-and-D, that's the idea. The TJ Shannon on a rookie contract, I mean, Minnesota's only going to pay him, $2.6 million next year. They've got a couple of team options after that for a first-round pick. And he's already going to be 25 this year. So he's actually only a couple of years younger than Nickeil Alexander-Walker. So, if TSJ is 80% of Nickeil at what's the math on the I'll just use round numbers because I'm not going to do the percentage right now. $2.5 million versus $15 million. Like, if he's 80% of the production at a fraction of the cost, now those are the tough decisions. A team that's been in the conference finals consecutive years, you would argue this is not the time to make that choice. But there's also the reality that you have to make some of these choices along the way. And if you can only, and there's also the other factor is the upside that I just talked about. There's a chance Terrence Shannon Jr. is better than Nickeil at some point in the next 2 years. It may not be next year, but if he's 80 to 85% of the production next year at a fraction of the cost, and the year following that is 120% of the production because he's just a better player and still at a fraction of the cost, then you still win this value proposition overall. And I think that's a real calculation Minnesota has to make. So given all those factors, it wouldn't shock me if Nickeil's gone. Unfortunately, I love Nickeil Alexander-Walker. He's a perfect fit for this team. A fantastic acquisition by Tim Conley. I just think there's going to be more money elsewhere, and TSJ can provide a lot of what Nickeil does, again, at a fraction of the cost. Let's talk about Naz Reid. We talked a little bit earlier about, at the start of the show, about the contract situation, but again, $15 million if he opts in for next year. The option there is June 29th. So on June 29th, Julius, that is Julius Randle's option. Where did I lose my? Oh, there we go. June 30th. So it's off by a day. June 30th is the player option for Naz Reid, where he chooses whether or not to opt into $15 million. There's very little cap space elsewhere. Like I said earlier, Minnesota could just extend him. They could buy out that last year. They could add to it. I think that's probably what happens. Like, sitting here right now, I think Nickeil's gone. I think Naz gets an extension and they rip up the last year of the contract. And I think Julius Randle opts in, and then the Timberwolves look to trade him. And if not, he could walk next summer, or the Wolves could extend him. They could do the Rudy thing where they extend him at lower average annual value, but add years to the end of the deal. But I think the Naz player option gets essentially either he opts in and they rip it up, or he opts out. Well, I think that's probably the more likely scenario is that then Minnesota finds a way to keep him on a longer term deal. Naz is still just going to be 26. Of course, we all know what a cult hero he is in Minnesota, and the Timberwolves are, do not want to lose him. For all intents and purposes, you could argue he actually improved this year over his 6th man of the year season last year, and he didn't even like place in the top 3 of 6 man of the year this year. Certainly the team winning 7 fewer games the regular season has something to do with that. And the shooting percentages were a little bit down, but he improved in a lot of other areas. And I'll talk about why I think Naz Reid is a better player now than he was a year ago. And we'll close the show with that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at DoorDash. NBA fans, you know what time it is. It's playoff season. It's finals time. That means big performances and even bigger rewards. DoorDash is bringing the heat with a slam dunk deal for DashPass members throughout the 2025 NBA playoffs. It's called They Swish, You Score. Anytime a player drops 50 or more points in a playoff game, DashPass members score free 3-piece crispy tenders combo from Wingstop the very next day. Just place an order of $20 or more. Use the code Wingstop50 at checkout, and that combo is yours. Crispy, delicious, and totally free. Offer valid noon to midnight the day after the game. Terms apply. I don't know what your go-to move is after an epic game. It might just be ordering wings. Actually, I had Wingstop delivered by DoorDash Saturday night this weekend. I did. No joke. Wingstop delivered by DoorDash. It was fantastic. And what better time to do it than the day after somebody scores 50 plus? Maybe SGA does it. Maybe Tyrese Halliburton does it in game 3 back in Indiana. Imagine being rewarded with free food just because someone in the finals went off for 50. Here's the play. Sign up for DashPass to unlock this and more exclusive deals all season long. When any player scores 50 plus in a playoff game, DashPass members can grab a free 3-piece crispy tenders combo from Wingstop the next day with a $20 or more order and code Wingstop50, Wingstop50. That's DashPass, your door to more savings, more flavor, and more ways to win. Terms apply. All right, Naz Reid. So just a quick glance at Naz's counting stats, and depending on where you're looking, it's like, okay, on the one hand, he averaged more points per game. He averaged more rebounds per game, more assists per game, same number of blocks. He had a better year. Well, then you look at the shooting splits, and it's like, all right, he was a 1.5 worse from the field. He was like 3.5 points worse outside the arc, believe it or not. 3.5 percentage points worse on 3-point shots. Or 3-point percentage, still his second best 3-point percentage of his career, by the way, and above his career average outside the arc. 2-point percentage, roughly the same. Free throw attempts per game, slightly better percentage. And you'd say it's kind of a wash. I think grand scheme of things, he improved slightly, and here's why. We saw the assist rate go up 4.3 points, percentage points. So by far the best assist rate of his career. And we saw the turnover rate go down. His lowest turnover rate since his second season in the league 5 years ago, just a 9.9% turnover rate. So Naz was looking to distribute. He was looking to facilitate for others, and much more than he had in the past, and didn't actually turn it over anymore. And that's an element to Naz's game that he's developed a bit more smoothly than I would have expected. So the increased assist rate with the lower turnover rate is awesome. And the overall scoring was up a little bit offensively. Now, we've seen the free throw rate dip for him, over the last 4 years. Every single year, it was by far a career low once again this season, and he's attempting less shots at the rim. My one point of concern for Naz is he actually, this year, for the first time, attempted more than half of his field goal attempts from outside the arc. More than half his field goal attempts were from outside the arc. Go back to his third year in the league, and actually his second year in the league, 42% of his shot attempts were within 3 feet of the rim. The next year was 40%. This year is just 20% of his shot attempts were within 3 feet of the rim. And more than half his shot attempts were threes. The average distance on a shot was 10 feet in his second year in the league, and he played 70 games that year. This year it was almost 15 and a half feet. Now, Naz is a really good 3-point shooter. And I think he should take advantage when he's got bigs on him, and he can actually stretch the floor and knock down his releases so fast. And we saw so many games, especially early in the season, where he made that first 3 and you just knew it was going to be a big night for Naz. But he's got to balance that. He has to be getting to the rim more often. I think he should actually, believe it or not, play a little more like Karl-Anthony Towns / what Naz used to play like when they're playing 5 out. He has to be able to attack closeouts. He has to be able to be decisive, catch and go. and put his head down and get to the rim. And I don't know, like, I think of a couple years ago when he broke his wrist toward the end of the season. Remember heading into the playoffs just not long before Jaden McDaniels broke his hand punching a wall in game 82. I have no idea that this is true, but like, I wonder if Naz trying to yam on somebody, I can't remember who it was, but he tried to dunk on somebody when he broke the wrist. That was always his attitude. And I feel like we haven't seen quite as much of that over the last 2 years. Again, the offense has improved overall. He's continued to improve. He's not even 26 years old until August. I don't take this as I'm ripping on Naz Reid. Constructive criticism here is he should be getting to the rim more often. He's still really good at the rim when he gets there, but he's getting to the rim like half as frequently as he did 3 years ago. And he's a good three-point shooter. He was 41% last season, but this season he was 38%, which is good, not great. It's above league average, barely. Like, it's really good. But if he adds a bit more of the catch and shoot, catch and go, take a opposing big off the dribble, get to the basket, like if he adds that or continues to keeps the frequency of that up, it's going to make the three-point shot that much more effective. And now that we know that he can facilitate in the way that he has, and some of that is, by the way, a driving kick situation from Naz. I thought that was actually better, and maybe that contributes to less overall rim attempts for him because he is looking to pass more on the drive. I think he's got a few more, passing a little bit more out of the short roll, catching near the free throw line and passing to the perimeter, spraying passes out to the three-point line. I think that's part of it too. And he did improve overall when it comes to that. Kind of seeing that next step, that next pass. But the more assists and less turnovers is awesome. More rim attempts is important. The efficiency, despite the increase in three-point attempts, the efficiency was not better. And then the last thing is the rebounding for him. I've always been a little bit concerned about it, and I know he's near the rim even less often on both ends of the floor than he had been. With the way the Wolves are defending now, more switching on the perimeter. Now, he's been pretty good defensively in those situations. Although it was a bit hit and miss, especially that Warriors series when Jonathan Kuminga kind of ate his lunch a couple of times. So all that to say, he's around the rim less often on both ends of the floor. It was the second worst offensive rebound rate of his career, second to only last year, and the second worst defensive rebound rate of his career, tied with last year, and overall the worst total rebound rate of his career. And I know he's playing around the rim a little bit less often, but I think he's a primary culprit when we talk about the Timberwolves not rebounding well enough as a team. That's an area that Naz should just be a little bit better. He's got to be a little more consistent there. But again, I can build the case based on the improved assist rate and improved turnover rate and the increase in three-point attempt rate while still being impactful and effective from outside the arc. I could build the case this was actually a better year for Naz than the year before when he won Sixth Man of the Year. I think team success has a ton to do with that. And of course, the gaudy 41+% from outside the arc last season. And again, this year it was 38%. Like, that certainly doesn't hurt either. Like I said earlier, I think Naz will be back. I think he's the priority. I think Julius Randle's next on the list, and then Nickeil. And Naz is the one that's probably also most motivated to be in Minnesota. And by the way, if Randle does opt in and then ultimately get traded, that also solves the Naz playing time conundrum as well, because Naz would then potentially move into the starting lineup if Julius Randle's traded either before the end of the summer, which of course happened to him last year. He was traded in late September, or maybe it's at the deadline. If he opts in and the Wolves are having a so-so season, maybe Julius Randle's traded at the deadline after he opts in, and then Naz becomes the starter at that point. So Naz could kind of see that potential writing on the wall if he chooses to come back. Like, hey, there may be a full more minutes for me down the road. And therefore I'm even more likely to opt in and stay in Minnesota and ultimately sign an extension. Also, by the way, he did play a little over 3 minutes more per game this year than he did last year. He did start 3 more times, but I thought Chris Finch did a good job of juggling the big man rotation this season overall. So my prediction, I don't think Nickeil will be back. I do think Naz will be back on an extension, and I think Julius will be back opting into the player option. We'll get some clarity here in about 3 weeks when these options are all they come due June 29th and 30th, which is following the NBA draft. We'll start draft coverage probably next week, and I'll spend the next 2 weeks talking a lot of draft. Minnesota's got the 17 and the 31 pick. So a lot to talk about there. The rest of this week, we'll finish player reviews. We're into the starting lineup now. We'll talk about some other Timberwolves news. We mentioned Nickeil. There's a small Chris Finch rumor and a couple other quick notes that I'll probably hit on tomorrow's show. So we'll do all that here later in the week. We're still daily throughout the months of June and July. So be sure that you're following and subscribed to wherever you listen to podcasts, that you're following and subscribed to Locked On Wolves. A big thank you for making this show your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. A reminder that for your second listen, you can listen to the Locked On NBA Big Board Show. NBA draft expert Rafael Barlow reacts to every workout, interview, and rumor leading up to the NBA draft. Find Locked On NBA Big Board on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.